She was standing on a cart like a worn-out mule, her head hidden beneath a rough sack, her feet dripping blood across the wood, wrists bound together in front of her like some condemned criminal. And they were shouting bids for her, as though it were nothing more than sport. $1, the heavy-set man hollered, laughter choking in his throat. A wild savage, yours to keep forever. And the mob roared with him, old men with leathered skin and whiskey on their breath, young drifters with dust caked in their boots and emptiness staring out their eyes. Nathan Hale stood at the edge of that gathering, his chest hammering like a war drum. He had seen horror before, in the mud at Antietam, in the broken faces of boys breathing their last. But this was something darker. Evil with an audience. He should have walked away. That's what men like him usually did. Keep their head down, let the world rot. But then the girl faltered once, knees buckling under the shame, and that was enough. $1, Nathan said, his voice flat, low. The crowd went silent, like someone had slapped the sound right out of them. The auctioneer sneered, sold to the lonely farmer. He spat the words, mocking as Nathan climbed the wagon, cut the cords, and yanked off the sack. He had expected to see a broken girl, a hollow shadow of a victim. What met him instead was defiance, eyes glowing like embers. Shoulders squared, not beaten, not afraid. That gaze would cling to him for the rest of his life. He didn't know her name, didn't know her story. But he knew the instant he touched that rope, he had taken on more than a woman. He had stepped into a battle he wasn't prepared for. Nathan didn't utter a word the entire ride back, not to appear mysterious, but simply because he had no idea what to say. He'd lived alone for 7 long years, ever since his wife Clara had passed. Silence had become his companion. Some days he even welcomed it. But now there was company, and not just any kind. A woman who hadn't spoken since he freed her. She didn't cry, didn't thank him, didn't even look fearful. She just trailed behind his horse barefoot, as if it were nothing. By the time they reached his ranch, the sun sagged low. The place seemed smaller than he remembered, almost ashamed of itself. Nathan felt the same. He pointed toward the small barn. You can stay there. There's water and a cot. She gave no sign she'd heard. That night he lay awake, unable to rest. The silence had changed. It carried a pulse now, a presence. By morning, he left food and coffee on the porch. He never saw her take it, but by noon the dishes were empty. For 3 days, they spoke not a word, yet little things began to shift. When dawn, he found the broken gate latch mended better than he'd ever managed. Another day, his torn shirt was neatly stitched, like one bought new. He began speaking, not to her directly, but into the air. About the cattle, the skies, the ache in his knee. She never answered, but he knew she was listening. He could feel it. Then the storm came. A black wall of clouds rolling in fast, winds howling like a train barreling down. Nathan rushed toward the barn to drive the cattle in, and there she was, standing in the doorway, watching the heavens like an old enemy. "Get inside!" he shouted. She didn't move. Not until the lightning cracked so close it shook the earth. He sprinted back, grabbed her arm, and dragged her to the cabin, slamming the door shut behind them. They stood there, drenched to the bone, hearts pounding. That's when he saw it, fear flickering in her eyes. The storm itself didn't frighten him, but that look did. Because for the first time, she wasn't just enduring. She was vulnerable, human. After that night, something shifted. Not with speeches or promises, but with presence. Each morning, Nathan left coffee and cornbread on the porch. It always disappeared by midday. Soon she started sitting on the porch steps, not close, but no longer hiding either. He learned her name not through her lips, but from a mark in the dust. One morning, resting on the rail, was an old saddle he'd lost weeks ago. Beside it, sketched softly in the dirt, was a prairie flower. That evening, he dug through one of Clara's old botany books. Page 47. There it was, Ilara, a blossom, and in an old tongue it meant everlasting bloom. The next morning he spoke it softly as he set the plate down. Ilara, she didn't flinch, didn't answer. But from then on, each time he said it, her gaze lingered on him a second longer. A few days later, she spoke his name. Nathan. One word, steady, quiet, but it froze him cold. After years of silence, his name sounded like music from another soul. They didn't talk much after that. They didn't need to. They began repairing the ranch side by side, her quiet touch in the kitchen, his strong hands in the fields. He read aloud by firelight, fumbling words from worn pages. Sometimes she smiled when he stumbled. They were building something honest, slow. One hushed evening, as he sharpened a hoe by the barn, Ilara walked over and gently laid her hand on his. No words, none needed. For the first time, he didn't feel like a man just enduring life. And if he'd known what lay ahead, he might have sharpened a rifle instead of a hoe. But that's the way peace works. You never realize how much you need it until it's on the verge of being torn away. And if you've stayed with this story so far, maybe you're the kind of spirit who still believes in tales like theirs. If that's true, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Stay close, because the West still has many stories to tell. Word travels fast in small towns, especially when folks have nothing better to do. Back in Riverbend, whispers about Nathan and that mysterious woman became full-blown tales. To some it was scandal, to others a cruel joke. But to Garrett Sloan, it was a wound to his pride. Garrett had been the one who dragged Ilara into town. He thought he'd sell her quick, get a drink and ride off. Instead, some quiet widower had made him look like a fool in front of everyone. Now every time Caleb's name came up, it was met with snickers. Garrett's pride was raw and aching, and when a man like him feels humiliated, he waits. He festers until he's ready to strike. One dusty afternoon, Nathan noticed a cloud on the horizon. Not rain, but dust kicked up by hooves. 4 riders charging fast. He set down the fence post he'd been fixing. "Ilara," he called calmly, "go inside. Lock the door." She looked up from her garden, saw the dust, and without a word, slipped into the cabin. The riders didn't slow. They stormed up, bold, half-drunk, Garrett leading. "Afternoon, Hale," he spat, like the name itself was dirt. "Heard you've been playing house with stolen goods." Nathan didn't flinch. "She's not stolen," he said firmly. "She's my wife." Not a legal truth, maybe, but one carved deep in his heart. Garrett barked a bitter laugh. "Think that changes a damn thing? She belongs to the town. We paid for her once. We'll take her back now." He swung down from his horse, hand drifting toward his belt. Nathan already had his rifle steady. "She's not leaving," he said, calm but deadly sure. "You can ride away, or you can learn how serious I am." The grass whispered in the pause. Then the cabin door creaked. Ilara stepped out, not armed, but wrapped in the blue calico shawl he'd once left for her. She walked to his side, chin lifted high. She didn't need to speak. She was already home. For a long heartbeat, no one moved. Nathan, rifle in hand. Ilara, silent but resolute beside him. And together they were louder than bullets. Garrett's eyes shifted between them and found something unexpected. Not fear, not hesitation, but strength, a bond forged in hardship he couldn't break. Muttering under his breath, he backed off. His men followed. They hadn't come for a war, just to scare. And they failed. By the time their dust vanished, Nathan hadn't lowered his rifle. He only turned, gave Ilara a nod. That night, few words were spoken. None were needed. The threat was gone. What remained was peace. The kind you earn, the kind you defend. And it stayed. Seasons passed. The ranch grew. So did they. Ilara's garden stretched wild and bright. Nathan's hands grew rougher, steadier. Together they built, not from what they'd lost, but what they chose to keep: trust, resilience, and maybe love. That, after all, was what the West was truly about. Not the shootouts or the gold, but the courage to rebuild after loss. The bravery to love again, even when it frightens you. And maybe now, listening, you're thinking about your own battles. Maybe you've lost someone. Maybe you've faced your own Garrett Sloan. Let me ask, what did you cling to when it hurt most? What gave you strength not to quit? And most of all, who stood beside you? If this story stirred something in you, reminded you of someone, or made you reflect on your own long road, go ahead and hit that like button. And if you want more stories like this, ones that make you feel, think, even remember, then subscribe. Because out here in the dust and wind of the West, sometimes a soul finds their way home. And when they do, you'll want to hear it.